Welcome to Small Town Snarks. I'm Joel.
And I'm Miranda. Let's get snarky.
Miranda.
Hey, Joel.
Let's get snarky.
I know.
Shall we?
I was in the middle of a chuckle because our producer, Mr. Daryl Warren, always says we're going live.
We are always going live,
Gets
but
the
we're
adrenaline
never
pumping.
We're never live, but we're always
Not
going
yet.
live. Not yet.
We'll have to
Someday.
do a live recording at some
We
point.
would have to do that. We'll have to pick a good show, good discussion.
It'd be
to have
very
that conversation.
chaotic.
It would be very chaotic, but I love the idea of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if our audience is ready for that energy yet. But,
I don't think they are.
I don't think they are either.
But I think once they see it, they'll be like, you know what? I wasn't prepared for this, but I'm glad I experienced it.
But I support it. I support it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. We got to talk about Grease.
Yeah. Do we want to discuss where we left off in our last episode? Because I'm pretty sure we were talking about picking out a show.
Yeah. So to briefly recap.
Yeah.
Last episode, we talked about basically how Grease was chosen, how we got the licensing, how we found the theater, all the things. And now we are approaching Grease auditions, and is going to touch on that, what the rehearsal process was like, and take us on a journey until we get to that theater and what that looked like.
Before we jump into auditions, there are Grease-specific auditions. I have to ask, do you enjoy the audition process? How do you feel about the audition process? Because I'm curious.
I'm so
I have my
glad
own
you
feelings,
asked.
but I'd love to get your opinions and then to hear how this process went for your first show.
Yeah. I'm so glad we're going to talk about this because I feel like there's some misconceptions when it comes to how auditions work. And granted, every place you go to is a little bit different. I personally feel that almost everyone who does theater thinks they want to be involved with casting until they've been involved with casting.
It's a nightmare.
It is a nightmare. I don't particularly enjoy it. There are parts of it that I do enjoy. I love, for instance, when someone comes in and is just perfect for a particular role that you've been envisioning.
Yes.
That's amazing.
That, or like seeing someone that you've seen audition before come in and really nail, like they've found something that fits them so well, and they've come to play and they're ready to really create a character, and you could just tell from day one that this was something that they were setting their sights on.
Right, and we've also, since we've done multiple shows at this point, we've had the opportunity to see people's growth when it comes to the audition process. So we've seen people who their first audition came in so scared and were barely able to get the words out, and then one day they'll come in and they'll just kill it. And it's like, it's the best feeling in the world because you're rooting for everyone when you're in that room, especially, the people that you just love working with. You're like, please kill this. Please just, I want you to kill this, and I want you to get the part you want, and all the things. It's tough. And I think Grease was unique in that audition experience because a lot of my friends from high school were auditioning. Yeah. And we had gone from this peer relationship to now I was in an authority role, and that was weird for me and it was weird for them, I'm sure. So that was tough.
I can imagine.
When all your friends come in, they all want the lead usually, so they are all looking for one particular role, and not all of them can be that one role.
You don't need 30 Sandys in Grease.
No, you don't. Yeah. Or 30 Rizzos. I mean, luckily it does have many roles that are really dynamic. But
there are so many really dynamic roles in that show.
There are.
It's everybody.
And I think that's why, like, when we talked about the subject matter of Grease and how, like, it's not necessarily a great message at the end of the show. That being said, there are some great female characters in the show. There's a lot of opportunity for women to perform. So I love that.
They're well constructed too. I mean, there's just so much material there to really understand these characters. And like, everyone gets their own unique number in the show. It like really develops them as who they are and their importance in the story.
It's a ton of fun.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
So When we did our auditions, I remember we were sitting at my boyfriend at the time, his house, and we were putting together the audition announcement for the Facebook page. And this was me, my, like, assistant director, my boyfriend who's going to be technical director, and we're all sitting there and we're putting together these announcements. And we had put it out there that, we were doing auditions. We didn't have any sort of sign-up method.
Oh.
It was just, here's where we'll be.
Show up.
From this time to this time, show up.
That sounds like chaos.
That was it. So, looking back on that, I'm like, wow. Obviously, I would do it differently because we do it differently now because I've learned and I've grown. But
make that mistake like one time and then you got to figure something else out.
We also, like, my co-director, will give her credit in this regard. She definitely, like, she had this idea to reach out to all the high schools about these auditions. So we reached out to all the drama teachers, and I don't even know who's working there at the time, but shout out drama teacher at Linganore High because we got so many students from Linganore because he told his students, hey, this company's doing Grease. I don't know if anyone else said anything to their students, but we got, like, so many kids from Linganore, so that was huge.
Yeah.
And it was funny at the time because there were still people I knew in high school that were in high school because I had just graduated a year ago, and they were talking about Grease, like, and that would have been, when we were in high school, like, if one of the people who had just graduated started a theater company and was doing a show, that would have been the hot button topic in high school for sure.
Absolutely.
So they were talking about it, and one of the girls that I, like, used to be friends with actually said something along the lines of, well, don't bother auditioning for that because Miranda's just going to cast herself as Sandy. And I was like, you have no idea why I'm doing this. Like, that's, my intention is not to be in this show at all. So I just thought that was interesting. I was like, no.
I'd like the point to be known as well that in the last almost 10 years that this company has been around, you've been in how many of the shows? Probably less than, I can probably count on one hand. Probably. So,
actually, in the shows, not in the pre-show, I think I've been in 2. The 3 if you count SpongeBob. I made an appearance in SpongeBob with you. Oh, yes,
we both did, yeah.
One of the shows I was in was because someone dropped out, and someone needed to be there.
Yes.
And another show that I was in, it was one of my favorite shows, and I auditioned for it, and, had an open audition like anyone else. So... It's really not, it's not my speed, Sometimes I do miss performing, but I just thought it was interesting that was their initial reaction was, oh, she must be doing this because she wants to be the lead. And I'm like, no, actually, I want to explore this other creative side of theater. Sure, and that's what I did. So we got very lucky that people showed up to audition.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things with the just open call. When you don't have people signing up, you don't know. You don't know if anyone's going to show up.
Yeah.
You think people are going to come. You don't really know.
Right.
So I showed up, and we're sitting there, and we're waiting there, and we actually had rented a building. So the people that do the Frederick 72-hour film festival every year.
Yeah.
They had, like, an office space in downtown Frederick.
I remember that now.
It's called Area 31. So we rented out the building, and I'll post a photo on Instagram. I actually found the first ever, like, casting table, like, selfie photo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But we were there, and we were setting up, and I just remember there's also a picture of me. I need to find it. It's me standing there with, like, scripts in my hand in the room with all the people that were auditioning. And I was just like, people actually came to this. This is crazy. It's happening. Which, at the time, it just wasn't an option in my brain for people to not show up. But looking back on it, I'm like, that could have happened. It didn't. And I'm glad it didn't. But, like, it could have. But young Miranda was like, oh, people will come. And she was right, somehow. So they came, which was amazing. And I remember... my I need a name for my assistant director. We'll call her Jane. It's not her real name. But Jane was telling me, oh, so-and-so who played Maria in Sound of Music at Linganore just showed up to audition. And I was like, holy smokes. I didn't see the show, but you're making it sound really good. So I was like, wow. So people we didn't know that were super talented were just sitting out there wanting to do our show. They did not know what they were getting themselves into. This is not a traditional show experience by any means. And we even had this one girl come in. It's one of the early auditions, and she just kind of immediately took control over the casting room, was like reaching over the table, grabbing things, was like acting like our friend. We didn't know her. And I remember all of us being like, this is red flag city. Like, this girl is just way too comfortable in this room. And we were just like, yeah, we're just not, we have the people, we're just not going to work with her. And I remember having that moment of like, oh, I can just make that choice. Like, I can just decide, I don't want to work with this person and just be done with it. And we had never had control over that. Like, even, you know this from high school, even when we would direct shows in high school, we weren't allowed in the casting room. Sometimes we got to see some stuff, but we weren't allowed to contribute to any of those decisions. So this was a whole nother area that it was like, there were some good things, and that was one of the good things. And we'll get into the bad things too. But
and I like that you make that point in reference to casting it's a process, and there's so much that goes into it in making that decision. And, you know, it's almost like a job interview in the sense of like, you never know who's going to have a say in that decision. Your professionalism begins when you walk in the door.
Yes.
And being there and showing, you know, your interpretation or who you are in that moment. And that's part of how that decision is made. I mean, you can have a lovely voice, but if your attitude or your general personality coming into a space is not one where you're willing to be supportive or understanding or work through the process with us, that sends a lot of red flags, and that does play into those decisions. I mean, 100%. Casting is so hard, and there's so much that goes into it that has to be considered. And I'm sure we'll do like a whole, you know, side episode on how to audition and what that looks like. But if I could give any advice to anyone listening who ever auditions for things, part of it would be, don't lose sight of the fact that you're in that room for maybe 30 seconds. Yes.
Maybe. It doesn't matter who's in the room. Always act like it's your first time meeting these people.
100%.
Every time. And my biggest thing that I like to see now, and I think you're kind of similar, Joel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I can see when people are passionate about what they're singing and what the material is. If you're passionate about that show, don't be afraid to let the joy shine through. Now, don't stand there and be like, I've wanted this role my whole life and this is my dream show. Don't do that. Don't oversell it. But if you're excited just to get in there and sing that song, show it. Show it. Because again, we only get 30 seconds with you. And there are so many times where it's neck and neck between two people. And like, how you behave in those 30 seconds can push you just above someone else. So never forget that. But also like, keep in mind, so much of it is a game for how you fit into the director's vision of that particular director, that particular show, that particular time, right? So if you don't get cast in something that you thought you were right for, it's not a reflection on you. It's just you weren't right for that director's vision for this show at this particular time. You could go to an audition down the street for the same exact show and get a completely different role. It's just the reality of casting. It's difficult because people are coming into the room and they're being vulnerable with you and they're showing you their art and they're pouring their hearts out. And like for some people, it is a role they've wanted to play for a long time. So I always try to respect that. But treat the audition as an opportunity for you to perform the material. Even if you never get cast in it, it's always a performance. So give yourself that, just have fun. Give yourself that opportunity. And easier said than done, you know, especially as someone who doesn't audition regularly anymore. I know it's very difficult. And I've even gotten feedback at one point that like, hey, Miranda, you should really smile more while people are auditioning. And I was like, I didn't realize that I had this resting face that was giving people the impression that they weren't doing a good job, or the jokes weren't landing or whatever. So
I think it's really interesting that you bring that piece of it up too, because, being attuned, and you may not audition very frequently, but you're attuned to what the expectations are for casting directors across the board. I mean, everyone, like you said, does things differently. They have different expectations for their auditions. They have different expectations of what they're looking for. But I feel like that interpretation or expectation of coming in and being professional and being prepared and being just being confident in what you're doing.
Yep.
Every time you go into a casting or an audition and start through that process, those people behind the table, I have never sat through an audition where I'm like, wow, I'm really hoping this person does a terrible job. I have never, ever once thought that. It's always I'm excited to see what they're bringing to the table. I'm excited to see that they're passionate about the material enough so that they want to audition. And I want to see you have a good time. I mean, I want to have a good time as much as you're having a good time. Yep. So it's just always something important to remember. And it's just really interesting to see that it's been like that from day one. I mean, those very specific things are things that you experienced during your first round of auditions for this company.
Yeah, and things that, I mean, there were situations that came up that I am definitely more equipped now on how to handle than I was the first time.
Sure.
And, I think it's valid to bring up again, like, a lot of these people were my friends. Not all of them got the roles they wanted. Mm-hmm. That was really, really hard. Mm-hmm. It was hard for me. It was hard for them. So, but before we get to that, just a fun anecdote. My parents brought water and snacks to everyone auditioning, so they all had, like, little water and little snacks there. Uh-huh. There was, I guess we'll get into the drama now. It's happening.
Sure.
Buckle up. Are you buckled in?
I'm buckled in and ready to go.
There was a girl I went to high school with that really wanted a particular role. Mm-hmm. And so we called them back for this role. Now, Sound of Music girl was also up for this role. Mm. And I remember doing callbacks. And I would have handled this differently now than I did then.
Sure.
At a certain point, I knew high school girl was not going to get it. Mm-hmm. And I had this really unique character opportunity for her that I wanted to talk to her about before she left the building, because I was like, she's going to be upset that she doesn't have this role, but I want her to understand what this other role I'm thinking of is. Mm-hmm. Before she gets that email. I tried to talk to her about it, and she ran out of the building crying, and I was like, oh. And I laughed, for the record, I laughed at that because I'm uncomfortable by the situation, not because I think it's funny. I don't think it's funny that anyone had such big emotions after auditions. I wish everyone would realize that it's never a personal attack on them, but when you're being vulnerable and it's something you really want, it can feel devastating. Absolutely. So she was completely devastated, went in the car with her mom, and her mom was also involved in the show in like a supporting character type way. Mm-hmm. So went in the car with her mom crying, and I was like, oh boy. Now where it gets like semi-juicy is this mom also called the mom of my assistant director, Jane. Mm-hmm. And Jane's mom was like, you need to reverse your decision and let high school girl have this role. Mm-hmm. And I was like, no, Sound of Music girl was better. She had a better audition. Mm-hmm. She was right for the part. We can't just reverse the decision because high school girl is upset.
Yes.
And even when I say better, it's just she had a better performance that day. Doesn't mean she's a better performer. It's just when it was callback time, when it was game day, she had a better game that day.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it means. So she had a better game that day.
Yeah.
And that got really difficult because I realized very quickly that Jane was heavily influenced by what her mom thought. And that was a difficult dynamic to navigate because, again, we just come out of high school where our parents did have a heavy influence over our actions. Now they didn't. Now we were adults, barely adults, but we were adults trying to run a company.
Right.
So some of these parents weren't prepared for that shift at all. So I had Jane then pushing me because her mom wanted us to reverse our decision. I had high school girl and her mom blowing up my phone, asking for another chance. And it just got really, really ugly. So that put definitely a damper on my excitement of the first day of auditions. Like, I was out to dinner with my family, and I was getting nonstop phone calls and text messages. Like, literally, and voicemails of just crying. And again, like I said, this was my friend. This was my friend from high school. So to disappoint her in this way and to feel that guilt and that shame was hard. And I knew even then, I was like, this is my first show, and I have to send a message of, like, sometimes the decisions are going to be hard.
Yeah.
But I stand by my decision. And I did. And I knew what the right thing to do was. And I did the right thing. You know, I cast the person who I thought was best for the part based on that day of auditions. And that's what you're supposed to do.
I think there's a really big... I think you hit the nail on the head in reference to the circumstances that were at hand at that point in time. You were transitioning from this situation where you were around all of these high schoolers performing in everyone was in high school together. They were all performing in shows together, all doing the same thing, and dealing with these individuals and these parents on a very specific level, where that's kind of the dynamic and the setup.
Right.
And going from that into, you are in this leadership role, and you were trying to handle this as professionally as possible, and if your first major decision is something that ends up being usurped, that's going to set a really bad precedent moving forward.
Yep.
So I'm impressed by you handling that situation, especially, that early on in that process of, like, knowing that I have to make a statement now, because if I don't make a statement, anyone's going to be able to make decisions for us. And you have a right as a director, and this goes just in general across the board with shows, you have a right to work with the cast that you see fit. Now, the expectation is exactly what you said of, someone may have a better audition one day, and someone may be a better fit for someone else directing the same show. Everything is circumstantial.
It's all about where people landed.
Right, and it's not a reflection on anybody's performance whatsoever, ever. Or who they are. It's not a reflection on who they are.
Who they are,
Right, sorry. It is a reflection on the performance given that day.
Yep.
But it's not a reflection on who people are, how good people are to work with. It really just is that audition that you give in that moment.
And that was, we went back, we talked about high school stories. And one of the things that came up pretty consistently for me is the question of, is it fair? Yeah. And fairness is something that's really important to me. And in that situation, I was like, it's not fair for me to pull this part from a girl I don't know just because the girl I do know is upset.
Right. That's
not fair. So it was tough. And I went through a lot of, like, emotional turmoil over it because I am a recovering people pleaser, as I like to say. I'm always trying to not fall back into those people-pleasing traits because they're a coping mechanism. That being said, when someone's really upset with you, all those triggers go off, and you want to just make them happy because it's easier if they're happy than if they're upset. And I'm really proud of myself looking back for sticking with what I believed was right, what I believed was fair. And I hope the people involved in that situation can look back on it and understand why I did what I did. But even if they can't, I stand by it to this day. I mean, there are certain decisions I made with Grease that I'm like, I would have changed that. This is not one of them. I think it was the right decision.
Absolutely.
But it really started the show off on kind of a sour note.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, too, like, I sent the cast list late that night after callbacks, like 11 p.m.
That is a quick turnaround for a cast list.
Yes.
That is impressive.
Well, because I was getting the phone calls and stuff, and I was like, I'm going to send this so that people know it's done, and they let it go.
Yeah.
They can have time to process, and then they can let it go.
Sure.
So I sent it, and then Jane's mom also criticized me because I sent the cast list late at night, and I should have waited for during business hours. And I was like, what? Says who? What kind of rule is that? I was like, right. And since then I've sent cast lists at all sorts of times, like midnight, 3 a.m., 9 a.m., so noon, whatever.
It is funny in hindsight, like, and with what we currently do, I mean, we have auditions happening, and we're sending people emails late into the evening about, callbacks or different things like that, and,
But this had also started this dynamic of kind of us versus them, and, like, there was not a decision I made from that point on that Jane's mom was happy with. It was always, Miranda doesn't know what she's doing, because clearly if she knew what she was doing, this other girl that we like would have gotten this part. So that was, before I move on, I do have one more audition story to tell, which is one of our male leads, actually. He didn't audition the first day, and he came to callbacks, and he was kind of like sitting in a chair. He had like a beanie on, and his eyes were kind of covered, and you could tell that he was like really nervous. And we're in callbacks, and my mom came in, and she was like, hey, I just want to let you know that there's this kid out there, and he seems really nervous, but I think he's here to audition, but I couldn't get a clear answer out of him. Okay. I went out there, I started talking to him, and like, hey, are you here to audition? He was so nervous, like barely talking, and I was like, you know what, you can close your eyes. I was like, just come in and sing the song. You can pull up the words, you can close your eyes, whatever. He came in and just crushed it, like was perfect, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is this role, this is it. And I unfortunately haven't had the privilege of working with him since then, but that was his first big role in theater, and now he's doing like professional stuff in New York. And it's just, sometimes it really just takes someone taking a chance on you to make that happen. So it's just a nice reminder, and looking back on that, remembering that sometimes there is like really good talent out there, and they just don't feel the confidence yet to express it. So that was a nice audition win. We can end on a high note. That was a really good moment. Shall we move on to rehearsals?
Oh, yes.
The show is so chaotic.
It's so chaotic, and like, I will just say, just watching all of this stuff from outside, because I wasn't involved in the Grease process, but like watching it, like seeing photos on social media, seeing things that were being posted, specifically with the rehearsal process, you found a way to make it work, which has always been kind of our motto. But I do just want to ask Miranda, where did you all rehearse for Grease?
I'm so glad you asked.
Yeah, of course.
We rehearsed in my parents' basement.
Oh, okay.
In my parents' backyard.
Okay.
At the Walkersville Recreation Center.
Oh, yes, okay.
And one time at Heritage Farm Park.
Oh, yeah. We love a good outdoor rehearsal in summer,
So the read-through, I just can't even imagine trying to do this today. Let me just say, I do want to acknowledge, no matter what I say about anyone who is involved in Grease, and some of these stories are, I'm sure, hard for people to relive in some ways. That group of people is the reason this company started.
Oh, absolutely.
1,000%. Like, I can't imagine let's just take our most recent cast, for example, Pippin. Love that cast. Love the cast of Pippin. If I went to them and said, we're going to go rehearse at Heritage Farm Park today, some of them would have gone.
Yeah.
I don't think we would have gotten everyone.
No.
Grease was so unique in that everyone who was in that show was in the trenches every day.
Absolutely.
With me. And if we were rehearsing in the basement today, they're like, all right, let's go. Backyard, sure, why not? Heritage, sure, okay, cool. I mean, I owe everything to them. And that's not even exaggeration. Like, the people I still talk to, the people I don't talk to anymore, like, everyone who was involved in that show, I owe you everything. You're the reason that we're here. And so I guess, this is just my moment of saying thank you to everyone who was involved in that show. You made the company. You laid the foundation for this company. Yeah. So, a lot of people would have bailed based on our crazy rehearsals and process, but they did not a single one. So
I love hearing about those locations. You know, I was aware of all of them at the time, and just thinking about the progression from where we went with Grease, and like we'll talk about it with future shows, but like how our rehearsing process and our locations changed, and the dynamics changed, and the pieces that were involved with them changed every single year, and you know they continue to change.
It's like when people complain that it's hot, I'm like, we used to rehearse outside. We used to rehearse in a barn.
We rehearsed in a barn. We rehearsed in a building without heat during the winter.
During the winter. And we had one little heater that we would all stand around before rehearsal, and then we would be like, all right, let's get moving.
So we're very appreciative for the climate controlledness of our current rehearsal space.
Yeah, people work with us now and they complain about something. I'm like, you don't even know. You don't even know what we went through to be here.
Oh, goodness.
But there's always, I mean, I'm sure someday we'll look back, in another 10 years, we'll look back on what we're doing right now and be like, wow, we have quite the upgrade now. But so rehearsing in the rec center was interesting. We did have to pay for that space, and we weren't a nonprofit at the time. Okay. So we didn't get the nonprofit rate. I think they technically gave it to us sometimes when they weren't supposed to. Thanks, rec center. Appreciate you. We also had to pay more for the gymnasium. So we were often in this like little room. Now, one of the cast members, his mom worked there. Okay. So she got us into the gym a couple times. She was also really concerned about people wearing character shoes on the gym floor, and it was this whole hoopla.
It's a universal issue, yeah.
Yeah, everyone's worried about floors. I get it. Everyone's so concerned about the floor. But we were in this little room most of the time, and me and my craziness decided to make Grease Lightning like a trick-heavy number.
I think we'll keep a trick counter going as we go through these podcasts, because
there's a lot of tricks.
I think that was where the trick association was born. Was with Grease Lightning. Yeah. Yeah,
and some of them were intense enough where we couldn't do it in the little room with the low ceiling. So if we didn't have the gym, we would step outside and do them outside, and then keep running in the main room. Yeah. But it was really good when we had the gym, because we could do all our tricks. What was really hard is if one of the guys in that number wasn't there, the whole thing was derailed because we couldn't run half the tricks. But Sound of Music girl, which I need to stop calling her that. I need a name for her because she sticks around for a while. We'll call her Paulette.
Paulette, yeah. I like Paulette.
We'll call her Paulette. So
I think that person would also like Paulette, yes.
I think she'd be fine with me name dropping her too, but I just want to make sure before I do it. So Paulette was just like, hey, I'm happy to help out. Call me when you need me. I was like, great. So Paulette came in for multiple Grease Lightning rehearsals and just stood in for whoever wasn't there. And she was a great motivator to have there.
It's very Paulette.
She does that
Paulette
to this
still
day.
Does it, yeah.
She'll text us. I mean, she's getting paid for theater now, but she'll still text us and be like, hey, I'm in town. You want me to do some fight choreo? You want me to whip them into shape? Whatever. And we'll be like, yeah. Please. And every time I see her, I'm just like, oh, thank God. But, yeah, so it was a choice on my part to do that. And I understand why I did it, because I was kind of like, a lot of guys don't have a ton of experience with dancing, but I think they could do these tricks. And we got there. Yeah. But it was a journey. It was a journey to get there.
Sure.
And I also threw a quick change in the middle of it, where they had the little, like, they had the red maintenance worker type suits that they would put on in the middle of the number. And it would always be a gamble. It'd be like, is everyone going to get their suits on? Is everyone going to do it? I don't know.
We love a good guessing game.
We do. There's also, I have some images of this as well, but the costumes and the set pieces had completely taken over my family's home. Like, I remember at the time my parents were so concerned about the HOA getting involved, and I was just like, no. Like, why are you worried about this? You should be worried about this big show that's happening in, like, a month.
Yeah.
That was my focus. Looking back and seeing the pictures, I can understand, because there were, like, random doors and walls that were just laying on our front yard. Because we had to paint them all outside. If you went in the house, there were costumes everywhere. Mm-hmm. If you know Grease, there's a lot of costumes in that show.
A lot of different scenes in that show.
The brutal part is the set pieces, which we'll get to when we talk about performances and Tech Week and how that worked. But the set pieces that were outside, half of them we didn't end up using. We spent a lot of time painting them, though.
Won't be the first time we had to cut set pieces at the last minute.
It won't be, but it also, this was by far the worst case.
Oh, yeah.
That we never repeated this. But just to reiterate how new I was at this, I remember early on we were building the picnic table. Mm-hmm. And it was me, Dakota, and my mom all working on this picnic table. And we had some lumber, I think, from my grandparents, but we had to go buy screws. So we were at the hardware store buying screws. And my mom was like, okay, we can grab this big box. And I would pay for everything with, like, my personal card.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have a company bank account, nothing. And I remember it was $60 for a box of screws. Mm-hmm. And just having that moment of, like, this is just for the screws. That was pretty scary. I was like, what am I getting myself into?
It's one of the things that I love about community theater, and one of the things that I also hate about community theater all at the same time, is that you become very resourceful.
Yes.
And I can only imagine starting out as a brand new entity, or just, I mean, at this point in time, it was so new. You didn't have a surplus of items to pull from. You didn't have costumes galore, and, like, now I'm just like, we need some screws. Okay, let's go grab some screws. But, like, I can only imagine. And that first discovery of, like, stuff's expensive. Stuff's really expensive.
Yeah, and that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. I mean, I haven't actually gone out myself and bought a box of screws in a while. Mm-hmm. But I imagine the price has probably gone up.
Probably.
But the other example of that, too, is we were at Joann's. We were getting fabric for Sandy's opening costume. And I was really particular, especially with the leads. I wanted them to look like they were in the movie. So I wanted the costumes to be very similar.
Sure.
So we were buying fabric for the poodle skirts. She wears like two poodle skirts. And the fabric for the two skirts was around $60 as well. And I was like, how many costumes do we need in this show? And it just, I got to the point where I was like, you know what, Mom? You go buy what you need. And we were still in the same bank account. I was like, just pull it right out of my account. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear about it. I was like, it's too stressful. But yeah, it's kind of like when you move into your own place for the first time and you're trying to cook a meal and you're starting with nothing and you have to go to the grocery store and your meal's like 4 times more expensive because you have to buy the seasonings and you have to buy the oil. Like, you don't have anything on hand. It was that type of feeling where as we've gone on, it's gotten a lot cheaper to do these things because we have stuff to pull from, like you were saying.
Yeah.
But when you start with nothing, it's an investment. You're building that future.
And you've got to get started somewhere. You have to start somewhere with it.
That was tough.
Yeah.
And a fun anecdote. I was so in the thick of rehearsals, and at one point, my friend texted me, and she was like, hey, do you want to go see a movie tonight? I was like, yes, please. Like, I just need 2 hours where I'm not thinking about this show. So me, her, our friend Brooks, and Dakota all went to see this movie. Yeah. And it was Secret Life of Pets. Guess what song plays in Secret Life of Pets?
Oh, no.
We Go Together.
Of course.
So I'm sitting there in the theater. I was like, I finally got away. 2 hours, and then they start playing that song, and I was like, are you kidding me?
Can't escape it.
But I've had experiences like that off and on where I almost feel like, maybe this is my spirituality coming into it, but I almost feel like the universe was like giving me a sign, like, you're going to be okay. Like, it's going to be fine. Like, I've had doubts, before where I'm like, I just can't do this anymore. And I'll like be at the grocery store or something. And this is well after Grease. And without a doubt, like every time I think that way or whatever, I go into a store and like a random Grease song starts playing. Sure. I'm like, well, I did that one, so I can do this one, and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But yes, we were making it work. I have video of the cast running the show in my backyard, which I will share because it's so cute. And I can share those because the theater company got permission to record those, so nice. I don't feel weird about sharing those photos. But yeah, and 2 of the guys in the cast were actually in Bye Bye Birdie at Fredericktown Players, which is funny because we had Bye Bye Birdie and Grease going on at the same time. But that actually really helped us because we were not done the costumes, and the guy who did the costumes for Bye Bye Birdie had a bunch of 50s costumes, and he let us borrow some. And that was the first of many times that we've utilized the community to help us put a show together. And so we're doing all these run-throughs. We're getting the show together. It's happening. And at one point, high school girl, her mom had a bit of a freak out. Oh, no. I will say. I think we call them big feelings now. She was having big feelings.
Lots of emotions. Yeah.
And she just, like, lashed out at me in front of my entire cast. And she was yelling because she thought I was doing too many rehearsals. Now, that definitely could have been a discussion that she pulled me aside for, and we could have talked about the rehearsal schedule and what her concerns were. She didn't do that. She had big feelings, and she screamed at me in front of my cast and just kept yelling. And Dakota got involved for like a minute, and then he backed off and realized that I'm not going to get anywhere with this. Yeah. She's just mad. Let her yell, and I dismissed the cast. I didn't say anything to her, and I remember walking outside and just crying. I just like had this like cry moment to myself. Yeah. Got myself together, make sure it didn't look like I was crying, and then just walked back in. And as people were trickling out, and just acted like nothing was wrong. And I will say that's like the first of many moments throughout STS where I've had to find private cubbies to have my own little personal breakdown so I don't have it in front of the cast. But that was the first one where I found my own little cubby. I had my breakdown. I had my big feelings, experienced it, and then I went back in and was their leader because that's what I needed to be. And not saying that leaders can't cry, and I think that's something that I've been working on. Like, I do think leaders can experience emotions in a way that doesn't discourage their group and also shows strength. Like, there's strength in experiencing emotion as well.
Absolutely.
But being so young, I was like, I can't show them how much this woman just got to me and how small I feel right now. And that was a big thing, is, like, looking back on it, I would think that she probably feels bad about that behavior because I basically was a kid trying to do something that I'd never done before. And she screamed at me in front of everyone. And this wasn't like sometimes when your parent is yelling at you, you're like, stop yelling at me, and they're not actually yelling. This wasn't that. She was screaming at me, like, full out screaming. But, we all have big feelings sometimes, and some people are able to navigate those better than others. And I think that was an example of, she had a moment where she wasn't in control of her emotions, and unfortunately it was directed at me, who was feeling very vulnerable in that moment. So that was a hard day. And coming back from that and being like, I have to go into tech now. Because that was basically like one of our last rehearsals. And I was like, I have to put myself together and keep working because that's just what needs to happen.
The show's got to happen regardless.
Yeah. So it's, I think that was the biggest like rehearsal type drama. And honestly, I haven't had anything quite like that happen since. So we've had different issues, but nothing where a parent is coming in screaming at me. Like that was very unique. And I also think part of that was because she knew me from high school. I don't think she would have behaved that way if she didn't know me in that way. I think she believed that she had some authority over me. And again, it was another test of like, I have to show that I'm in charge and you can yell at me, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm in charge of this. So yeah, a lot of just crazy experiences with Grace, but all in all, it gave me the tools for some of the experiences we've had since then.
Sure.
So it was definitely not only the foundation for the company, but huge learning opportunity for me. I mean, there's no replacement for that kind of experience. Like, you have to learn by doing it. And I did it. And that, I learned so much. Like, just the auditions, the rehearsal process, navigating difficult relationships, navigating conflict. There was a lot to unpack there. But I also made some great friends. And there's people in Greece that still work with us today. So, yeah, shout out to our producer, Daryl Warren, who's like has victory arms.
He's having a moment.
He's having a moment.
He's having big feelings himself. Yes.
But he still works with us. Paulette still works with us. My brother was in that show. He still does stuff with us. So
yeah, it
was a time, and it tested my whole family, but we got through it.
There's nothing like just jumping into the deep end when you're learning to swim and like learning to figure out. And, we talked so much in our earlier episodes about the framework that was built up through the experiences that we had in high school. And I feel like none of those experiences, or you wouldn't have gotten to where you were to handle what you handled in Greece without having that initial framework.
Yep.
But then getting all of that additional experience through that process with Greece really, set you up for success. And there are still things that, I've heard those stories of like, the ones you just shared, they're still common practices or activities or things that you did in those initial rehearsal process or through that initial rehearsal process that still carry through to this day.
Yeah.
And it's, because you found what works, and it's stuff that still continues to be successful in our rehearsing process and our show process. And
something that hasn't changed is when I'm directing or when we're directing together, you can feel it when you're doing it really well, if that makes sense. And like, when you are a successful leader, you can look at your group of people and be like, have this moment of, if I fell, these people would pick me up, and they wouldn't even hesitate to do it. That's what I had with Grace. I mean, no matter what, anyone went through, or like, the drama with the high school girl, whatever, we had this dynamic where if I needed them, they were there. Yeah. If I told them to run, they would run. Like, we had that trust established. And that type of experience, that's when I knew. I was like, even if the show itself maybe isn't the best show we've ever done, I had this moment of, wait, I'm kind of good at this. Yeah. Because all these people are looking at me, and they're trusting me, and they believe in me, and they believe in what we're doing. Yeah. So that was really exciting. And one more funny tangent to end this episode on that I forgot to share. Yeah. I'm sure we'll hear more when we have Eric on for his interview, but at one point we were rehearsing in the backyard, and 2 of the cast members brought chicken to eat. Mm-hmm. Okay, here's where the interesting part goes.
Yeah.
The chicken had been out all day.
Oh no.
Like little remnants of it, and they threw it away. Very nice of them.
Sure.
They threw it away in the kitchen trash can. My dad used to do his workouts, like his morning workouts, in the living room.
Okay.
So he was in the living room, which is across from our kitchen, doing like a plank or a push-up, like something where he had to be close to the floor.
Yeah.
And he saw this line of ants
coming
all the way from the kitchen trash can over to him. And then he was like, what is happening? And he looked around. There were ants everywhere because ants had gotten into the chicken and they didn't realize it. And then they threw it in the house trash.
Oh, no.
There were a lot of times throughout this process where I tested my parents. They were just like, what is happening? You need to clean this up right now. I'm like, I don't know.
And they're still committed to this process to this day.
Yeah.
I don't know what would have pushed me away from doing this. Ants probably would have gotten me pretty close. I mean,
you get yourself up and ready to work out, and you're like, I'm going to do it today. And then you go down, there's just ants everywhere.
Oh, that's awful.
He was probably very pissed. It happens.
Yeah. Yeah, love a good ant story. I'm sure he still thinks about it to this day. I can't wait to ask him about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if he remembers, but
I feel like you can't really forget a story like that.
He might have some better stories that have taken its place.
Oh my gosh. Well, glad we got to learn more about auditions, and I guess we'll or auditions and our rehearsal process.
Yeah. And next time I'm going to take you through not tech week, tech days. We had 2 days. I'm going to take you through tech days. Mm-hmm. And performances.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Thanks for being snarky with us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anytime, Joel. Anytime.
Yeah.
All right. Talk later. And that's a wrap. Thanks for getting snarky with us. We'll see you later.
See you next time.